III, 1450 BC. This is the Pharaoh that stood before Moses, Tutmosis III. This amazing statue carved in pink granite. Tutmosis III, 1450 BC. Here in the British Museum. We're coming to a monument of Tutmosis III, very likely to be the Pharaoh that was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Notice how his head has been removed, vandalized, possibly due to the fact that he failed in stopping the Israelites from leaving Egypt because they escaped and were in the wilderness for 40 years. Tutmosis III of Egypt, his head being vandalized and removed, possibly due to the fact that he failed in allowing the Israelites to leave Egypt. And we know that in ancient Egypt, they believed in the human beings having something like an immortal soul. They believed in an afterlife, and of course the pharaohs went to great expense to have expensive pyramids or tombs cut out in the Valley of the Kings and were buried there. In fact, the pharaoh that's reputed to be the Pharaoh of the Exodus, his name was Thutmosis III. And it's interesting that his name contained the name Moses, isn't it? Because he was a stepbrother to Moses, the one in the Bible. So this Thutmosis III, his mother was Iset. She was a member of the harem. She was a concubine within Thutmosis II's harem. And Thutmosis II was married to Hatshepsut. And of course, that lady was the daughter of Thutmosis I, and she was the one that found the little baby Moses in a wicker basket in the Nile River. And of course, then she arranged for his mother to be his nurse. And of course, Moses was raised primarily by his nanny, who was in actual fact his mother, and his sister Miriam, of course, was involved in that as well. And because we know the history there, and really the way it happened, Hatshepsut did not have a son herself. Moses was her adopted son. So by lineage, Moses, the one in the Bible, would have been the next upcoming Pharaoh. But we know the story in the Bible where Moses, at the age of 40, fled Egypt after he killed an Egyptian who was beating up on an Israeli. And he fled for 40 years, and later he came back 40 years later from out of the land of Midian, which is over in Arabia today. He came back to Egypt at the age of 80, and he then approached the one who was his stepbrother, that is Thutmosis III, who now been in joint rulership with Hatshepsut, the queen. She was the one who took over the reign of Egypt while Thutmosis III was only a boy, around about age 12, I believe, when he came to power. But Hatshepsut, in all account, ruled over Egypt at that time until he was of age. And then Hatshepsut died, and Thutmosis III came to power. So that when Moses came back, he was actually coming before his stepbrother, Thutmosis III. Well, Thutmosis III, of course, when he eventually died, which is around 1425 BCE, he was buried in the Valley of the Kings. And in the actual area where he's buried, in the stone sarcophagus where he was buried in, there was this huge room, and around the walls of that room was a very elaborate diorama, and it's called an amduat. An amduat. An amduat literally means that which is there in the afterlife. And around these walls is depicted the 12 hours, as it's called, around the four walls, the 12 hours of what happens to the sun god after it goes down at sunset. The 12 hours of the sun being out of range, and of course then it finally comes up at sunrise. And this was the pagan idea that was carried on from, as I mentioned, way back to the time of Nimrod, Semiramis and Horus. And because Horus was one of the main gods of Egyptian pagan belief. And you can see pictures of this amduat on internet, and there's a whole elaborate story of their imaginary ideas of what happens to the sun. In fact, it just doesn't go around logically in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours right round to the 12th hour. It actually crisscrosses around a bit. It goes 1, 2, 3 and 4, and then it goes across to the 5th hour, and then it comes across to the 6th hour and down to the 7th, and then across to the 9th, and it's all over the place around these four walls. And it tells this elaborate mythological story about what happens in the what they believe happens in the netherworld, the underworld of the sun god, when it goes down at sunset. Well, they had no idea really of astronomy, so they had all these crazy ideas, and of course this was all pictured because they felt this is what Thutmose III would experience in the afterlife in his grave, which of course is ridiculous. We know with modern astronomy, and even in the astronomy of the days of Job from the Bible, Job understood that the earth was a circle, a sphere. He also understood something about space because he said God hangs the earth on nothing. Now you have to remember that Job said this at a time when pagans believed, well, I think it was, some believed that the earth was carried by 4 great elephants on a huge turtle swimming in a sea. So they had really some crazy ideas. And of course, as we know, as I've just mentioned, the Egyptians really did not fully understand astronomy. And they thought that there was something about where the sun goes under the ground or into some sort of dark netherworld for 12 hours and then emerges again at sunrise. This was their idea about the sun god. Ammon also was another name for the sun god in the Egyptians. So they had this idea of the afterlife, and it played an important role in ancient Egyptian religion, and its belief system is one of the earliest known in recorded history regarding the idea of an immortal soul. When the body died, the Egyptians believed parts of its soul, known as the Ka, Ka, and the Ba, that's the personality, would go to the kingdom of the dead, while the soul dwelt in the fields of Aru. Osiris demanded work as restitution for the protection that he provided. Egyptians also believed that being mummified and put in a sarcophagus, which is an ancient Egyptian coffin, carved with complex symbols and designs, as well as pictures and hieroglyphs, was the only way to have an afterlife. Only if the corpse had been properly embalmed and entombed in a mastaba could the dead live again in the fields of Yalu and accompany the sun on its daily ride, as I've mentioned. Due to the dangers the afterlife posed, the Book of the Dead was placed in the tomb with the body, as well as food, jewellery and curses. The Pharaoh of the Exodus, who is believed is Thutmose III, even had a very elaborate diorama, or amduat, as I've mentioned, painted on the walls around his sarcophagus, depicting what he thought were the 12 mysterious hours of the travels of the sun god during the night after sunset to sunrise. Now, who followed after the Egyptians? Well, of course, we had the Babylonians, and then the Persians, and then we have the Greeks. And the ancient Greeks and the Romans carried on the same ideas of an immortal soul as did the Egyptians and the Babylonians. So that's a little bit about the immortal soul. You can learn a lot more about it in our free booklets, which I've already introduced in this video, the one on what happens after death. And then also this booklet here, Heaven and Hell. What does the Bible really teach about heaven and hell? When we die, do we go to heaven or do we go to hell, or do we just remain in our graves inert without any thought, more or less asleep, as the Bible points out, until the time of the resurrection? And then also a companion booklet to that is, what is your real destiny? Why were you born? You know, you have a great, incredible human potential to actually be transformed and born into the family of God as a son and daughter of God for eternity. This short little booklet here goes through the scriptures in the Bible, giving us that encouraging, wonderful hope, that sure hope of what happens after death and the wonderful destiny we have. These 3 booklets are completely free of charge, and also, if you haven't done so already, why not write for your free copy of the Good News magazine, also completely free of charge. It comes out every second month, comes out bi-monthly, and you can obtain all of this literature completely free of charge simply by writing to the address on the screen now.